On the serious note, we just won an award out in Chicago for the forum and the coverage of the Red Bank had this huge municipal election. And that was a case where I was not working for Red Bank Green yet.
Okay.
You know, we had a forum, an actual debate in person, and then, Q&As. And that was a situation where I made my own decision as a voter based on what was in Red Bank Green and at that forum, because there was no other source of information,
right,
and what people were saying, and I didn't know I didn't know 2/3 of the people running. I had no idea who they were.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Wilson. I'm a historian, an activist, and the host of the Freedom Over Fascism podcast, where we talk to people who give us insight into the current political moment, inspiration for state and local organizing, and connections with our co-conspirators all across the country. You'll meet rural organizers who focus on electing young and diverse candidates, independent journalists who prioritize democracy over disinformation, and candidates building change at the state and local level. I invite you to join the Freedom Over Fascism community and listen to Freedom Over Fascism wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining Politics for Parents today. I am really excited because I have a super busy reporter with me today to talk about the importance of local journalism in democracy. So thank you, Brian.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So we've got Brian Donohue from Red Bank Green. Red Bank Green, for most of you that are outside of New Jersey, we have a very amazing hyperlocal newspaper here in Red Bank, New Jersey. And Brian, you're the editor of Red Bank Green. You recently took it over. But before Red Bank Green, you actually, you've got a pretty long career in journalism. You were a newspaper reporter, statewide level for the Star-Ledger. And you've also done video and, different online platforms. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, your background and your career, because I think that gives us like a really good context into the discussion.
Yeah, so it's been class of 93, Boston University, and was in a newspaper newsroom a week following that, and ever since. So 31 plus years now in journalism. And I kind of followed this traditional path of community newspaper for a year, larger newspaper, Jersey Journal and Jersey City, which covered all of Hudson County, covered a lot of Hudson County politics. If you know New Jersey, Hudson County is the hotbed of rough and tumble corruption politics.
Oh, yeah.
That was journalism boot camp, working there for 4 or 5 years. And then I did a stint. I gave a stab at freelancing in Latin America and was traveling around down there. That went about 8 months or so, and realized I kind of do better when I'm on a staff, in a staff situation. And then I got hired at the Newark Star-Ledger of Newark, which is the largest newspaper in New Jersey. A sizable paper, of circulation, was up there with the Boston Globes and those back in the day. And then was there 18 years. Some of those were covering prisons and criminal justice here in New Jersey. I covered immigration issues for 7 years. And then I did video for about 6 years. Okay. I hosted a video webcast from the newsroom and then out in the field. And then that brought me into the world of TV, and I had a TV segment at News 12 New Jersey for 6 years. Okay. And now, coming full circle back to the hyperlocal level where I started, which is just makes my head spin. Like, I think if you had told me that this is where I would be, and when I was 25, I would have been disappointed. But at 52, it's like, this is really feels good.
Yeah.
To be back on this level, especially in the town that I live in and that I love. So I'm still processing it mentally, this trip and this journey where I'm at right now. But it feels pretty good.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, because I think so many people in town are so excited about you joining Red Bank Green. I remember when you joined, I think you guys released like a video. It was it was a really funny video.
Yeah, we remade. I had wanted to do this for so many years. I wanted to do a video recreating the scene in It's a Wonderful Life where George Bailey, right? Is it George? Yeah,
I think so,
George Bailey runs through the town in the snowstorm after he comes back to life, right? After Clarence restores him and he exists once again. And he has been born, and he runs through that scene. And I always thought, like, when the first snowfall of the season, I would film it. Because you got to do it before Christmas. I thought the video should be released before Christmas. And And so we did that when I joined Red Bank Green. I never got a chance to do it in any of my other jobs. And then we just added a snow effect, which you can do now. I guess the technology caught up with my idea. But after I had that idea, and we start out on the bridge. I mean, Red Bank's a perfect town to do it. You have a bridge over the river where we start the scene, and then I run through the town, and we shot it all in black and white. And then it really does feel to me like that closing scene in It's a Wonderful Life, where like he realizes that all these plans he had. I mean, I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, right? I spent 8 months in Latin America and Cuba and all these places, and then I worked for the Star Ledger, and people were jumping off from there and saying, "You got to come to work in New York." And I always kind of didn't want to work in New York. It would impede my surfing. That's kind of really the bottom line for why that. So that's another whole story. But it felt like, in my hometown now, I can work as a journalist in this place that I love, in this community, and people. It just felt so much. Coming to Red Bank Green felt like that last scene in It's a Wonderful Life, where he realizes it wasn't all out there traveling around the world and doing these huge things. That sometimes it's the human connections and the relationships right, in your neighborhood.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that you're a resident of the town, because I'd like to kind of talk about that a little bit, because as a resident of Red Bank and as a total political nerd, I think a lot about democracy and local journalism and transparency, and like how a lot of things that have happened in the journalism industry and the media industry kind of play into disinformation, and then, division among people, and then some of the, nasty stuff we see happening in the national political discourse. But, in Red Bank, I love Red Bank Green because we know what's happening in our town. Like, you guys cover everything that's happening. I mean, so many people, I think, in Red Bank know what happens at town council meetings because of Red Bank Green, and so many towns don't have that. So as a citizen, I value it, and I really like that I don't have to go to every meeting, although I try to go to as many as I can, to know what's happening. And then you also balance it out with just like fun stuff happening around town. So I guess, how does that, like, your role as a citizen play into it? How do you try to kind of like shield your own personal views and kind of separate the two to do fair journalism? I'm always interested in kind of how you wear those hats.
It leads to a lot of, I remember when I was working in Hoboken, and it was a similar situation. I was covering Hoboken, living in Hoboken, and I was only in my 20s then.
Yeah.
And on a Sunday morning when the president of the Board of Education was pounding on my door as I was trying to cook pancakes, I realized I am moving out of this town. I am moving to Jersey City, because you can't walk down the street. People come into your house. This was pre-internet days, so they didn't text you. But it leads to a lot of interesting situations. My wife is a teacher, and the Board of Ed is her bosses, and I have to cover the Board of Ed and this. So I don't know if something, goes. You have to just. I'm glad I'm 52 and doing this with 30 years of experience, because you learn to navigate those sticky situations. I've been in much pricklier situations in my career than anything Red Bank and those kind of things are gonna throw me.
Yeah.
Having Chris Christie's of the world come up and scream in your face at the corner of the State House. Having the mayors, a long line of Hudson County mayors who eventually went to jail, calling you and screaming you at the phone. You learn how to navigate these situations. So I think it's a great time for me in my life to be back here and doing that. But you can just be professional as a journalist. You just stick to the. There are stories that I have written even recently that I have opinions about, that I don't think anybody would read and know what the heck I thought or what I was feeling about those. So it's one of the things is that you're going to have to piss off some people that you're going to see at the coffee shop,
Yeah.
and people that you like. It's not like Chris. If I was covering the State House and Chris Christie or John Corzine was pissed at me, it doesn't matter, because they're they're so removed from my life. But you have to be ready for that.
Yeah. And you do have a point. It's about professionalism, and it's about people in those situations also understanding you're doing your job.
They have to understand, and if they don't understand that, you can't entertain any of their angst. If they don't understand that you're just doing a job and you're doing the best you can do, then
yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, your kind of career trajectory and things that have happened in the industry over the years. I mean, I personally feel I think local news is probably more important now than ever. I think at a time when people really question information sources, they question, like the corporate media and kind of, what's really their angle or how much can I actually trust this outlet, that outlet. I think on the one hand, at a local level, it's so easy for people just to kind of understand, okay, this is objectively what's happening in my town and this matters to me in this way. So I think it's really great to have a local news source that's like impactful and that's bringing people information. I mean, those of us who know you, I mean, I just know you from around town and I know you're a good journalist, so I read what you do. And I feel like this is kind of a medium that can bring people back to actually just like finding good sources of information.
One of the things about the local level is it's so tangible. You can see such tangible examples of what's happening on the national level, of how places can be divided by misinformation. Let me tell you like a story from recently. There was a group of people who wanted a few people in town started coming to borough council meetings wanting the borough council to pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war. And they were coming week after week, and they were being heard. And the council then basically said, and the mayor, we're not going to do this. We're not going to touch this. We want to focus on red bank issues. We don't have any say in this. He was not going to listen to us anyway. But they didn't say it in those words, but they basically said, we are focusing on this, and it would be very divisive for us to say anything one way or the next. And it was very clear, and I did a story about that. I said, mayor and council say they are not passing any resolution about anything. So then a week later, I walk into what I thought was going to be a very sleepy council meeting, and it's packed.
Yeah. It's
packed. And I said, what the heck happened? And then people on their phones, Israel supporters, start showing me a screenshot of a completely bogus resolution that had been drawn up. And they said, we're here for this resolution. They're going to vote on this resolution tonight. And I was like, I felt like it was a surreal moment because this place is packed. People are very emotional. I mean, there's nothing more divisive than the Israel-Gaza. And for a community, I mean, it's going to really go off the rails. In terms of a community, and being divided. And I personally got angry because I'm thinking, if you all had read Red Bank Green and read that was clear reporting by a professional journalist saying this is not happening, you would have seen this. The resolution it didn't even have the right. It was the city of Red Bank. It didn't even have where it's the borough of Red Bank. So there were telltale signs of this is bogus, but it had been sent around, and there were a lot of people there very upset that the council was going to vote on a ceasefire resolution. And, it reminded me on a larger level of like when the Russian bots, I don't know if you heard about this incident in Houston. There was a town in Houston that had dueling protests going on at at a mosque, and then another that had been organized on a fake Russian organized Facebook site called Texans for Liberty or something. And both Facebook groups had thousands of followers, and both were out of St. Petersburg, Russia. And they got people to physically come out onto the streets in Houston and scream at each other from across the street to the point of to a near boiling point. This has been written about all over the country. But so that's how subject we are to misinformation from social media if there's no local news fight and real journalism source, vetting this stuff and telling people in the community, in the case of Houston, this Islamic protest, this protest outside this mosque is not real. It's not real. It's someone in Russia who's organized this, and so anyway, that was one example on the local level of.
That's crazy. Where did you ever figure out, or did anyone ever figure out where that fake resolution had originated?
No, I don't know, but it was, I'm not sure where it came from. It was circulating on Instagram. I think it may have been written up by the people who wanted it, by the Palestine supporters, who maybe someone on that side may have said, here's the proposed resolution that we would like them to pass. And then somehow, as it just got circulated, absent any context, it was like people showed up. And arguing. They're making very impassioned statements saying, "Do not pass this resolution." And the council was up there saying,
What?
It was very surreal. It was very, but that's just one example. But that's where we are as a country right now, where people are reading things on their phones, thinking it's real, and then hating their neighbors for supposedly supporting something that they read on their phone about,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, friends and people will come to me because they know I'm very connected to politics and public issues. And they'll say, oh, I heard so-and-so do this. And sometimes it comes up with like at the state level, politics. And I'll be like, well, our representative is Vin Gopal, and you can just email his office and they will get back to you. So like, if you have a question about potential legislation or something the state's doing, just go to the source, right? So that's one thing I always tell people, just go to the source. If you think your congressman or the council, people love to go around the rumor mill, and because it's so easy to like go to Facebook and just Google things, it's like, well, no, just ask that person because, your elected officials' responsibility is also to you as a constituent. But it's interesting that you said, oh, well, if they don't only read Red Bank Green, then they'd know. But I think one of the things that I really like about Red Bank Green is, you definitely go into the weeds on some of the issues in town, if there's like a bond ordinance or different things that the council brings up, but you have to balance it with fun. So a lot of people read Red Bank Green not only for what's happening in town, but, what's this new shop on the corner, or the party line feature where you guys have, user reported information, or the infamous, April Fool's video that you guys did. So could you talk a little bit about, I think, how you guys, is that kind of a strategy, or is it really just like we're focusing on town? Like, how do you guys think about that?
I got to credit John Ward, who's the founder of the site, who ran it for, I'm taking too much credit here because this is his baby. And he ran this thing for 16 years and really set the tone for what it is. And people love these stories about what's opening and closing. And that's one of the things that I'm struggling to get up to speed with because going through the business records and the deeds and how he's the guy who just was, he had his finger on the pulse, and I'm struggling to keep up with that stuff. Yeah. But the fun stuff, he set the tone for that. And then the other thing is that, Kenny Katzko, our publisher, really pushes the fun angle. We all live in town, and we all love this town, and we love the characters, and we love the environment. And it's a fun place to be. And the other thing for me is I need to change pace. Like when I've been in beats, like at the Star-Ledger, when I just covered prisons and criminal justice, and I just have hard news or investigative enterprise beat, I really started to break down, like in terms of my burning out. Like I need a creative outlet. I want to be creative. I wanted to do, more fun stories. And then when I had a TV segment, and it was Brian's Positive in New Jersey on News 12, and they kept pushing me to do lighter and lighter and lighter stuff, I started feeling like, God, I want to do some serious news sometimes and tell some really important stories. So for me, I've always had that tension in what I like to do. I have a very, I need novelty. I have a sort of short attention span. I like to switch gears. So I just like to do that. And then having done video just lends itself to, I think, more fun reporting. You're not going to do a video about a bond ordinance. What I love about the web is you can pick up the tool that matches the story. If it's a story that just needs to be calls for 15 paragraphs to describe something in detail that people need to understand, that's a text story. If you have great photos, it could be just a photo of an event. And then video lends itself, I think, to emotion, humor. I did a video with Edith Blake, the 106-year-old woman, the oldest person in town. Incredible stories, and that was just we did both, but the video really let people hear her voice and her. So we do all that. I just like to tell the best story I can tell on any given day, however I can tell it, whether that's a video. But we really have baked in the fun into the equation and celebrating the town. When you think about newspapers, I hate when I'm on like social media or news sites and people. They comment, they're like, wow, it must have been a slow news day. Well, like when you do something light, like as though newspapers have never done anything but hard news reporting. Like newspapers, you pride yourself as a journalist in covering this hard news, but you got to realize that even back in the day, the most read section of the paper was the baseball box scores, the obits, you know,
Yeah.
the horoscopes. Like newspapers always had a lot of fun stuff. There's comics in the newspapers.
Yeah.
You know, so a news site doesn't have to be all just hard news. You're going to lose people like that, you know, because that's not people's reality. They want to laugh. They want to. So we like to keep. I mean, we have all. John Ward and I we both worked together at the Star-Ledger many years ago. That's how we crossed paths. But I think that newspaper foundation really serves you really well. It's both in the reporting and just knowing the sort of variety of things that people want to read. You know?
Well, and I think that's important to engaging folks with, you know, important public issues, right? I mean, I love NPR, but most people don't. A lot of people find it boring, and I get that. Like, I get it. You don't want to read, you know, wonky policy papers. You're not going to follow think tanks, but you know, you guys engage such a broad audience, and I think that's where the value lies. Because if I really want to watch, you know, people that I agree with, or if I'm just going to subscribe to a certain point of view, I mean, there's any number of cable news channels or other sources where you can kind of like go and you know what you're getting there. But to your point, you know, I think having these different types of stories, you're reaching a broader audience, and then they're going to see your headline on what happened at the council meeting, or, you know, when a prominent public figure in town, you know, steps down or something else happening. That's where I think the value is. And most people want a similar mix to what you're saying. Like, I myself, yes, I like doing very intellectual work, but I don't want to do that all the time. I like playing with my kids and I like to go to the gym. So many people are multifaceted in that way. So I think that really brings a lot of value. And that's kind of one of the reasons, you know, when I thought about this episode, I said, you know, I should just talk to Brian Donohue, because Red Bank Green keeps people in town informed. For better or worse, we have a lot of civic engagement. A lot of people come to council meetings. But, you know, I mean, so many of my friends in neighboring towns really don't. I mean, I can't think of many other outlets in this area that have that level of reporting in towns where people know.
I mean, it used to be the norm, you know,
Yeah.
when I was younger and I was a reporter and there was a robust, you know, local news ecosystem and newspapers. I mean, just in this, there was no town meetings that didn't have reporters at them. Mm-hmm. There was always at least one everywhere. Like it was everywhere. You look at the way things have changed. I mean, even on the state level too, right? When I was in the State House Bureau for the Star-Ledger, just the Newark Star-Ledger had 13 State House reporters, 13 people covering state government, just in the State House Bureau. You know, that might be down to one or two at this point. So you had like Governor Christie Whitman, who was Whitman governor when I was down there, and she would come out and she would face this press court. I mean, there'd be sometimes a dozen Star-Ledger reporters there, and then there'd be 4 from the Bergen Record and 3 from the Times of Trenton. And she would get hit with questions from people who knew things that she had no idea about. Mm-hmm. I mean, we would have like a reporter, Dusty McNichol, who was just a genius. He would go through these huge stacks of documents and find things that the Department of Treasury was like shenanigans, and throw a question at Whitman at the press conference, and she'd have no answer because she didn't know about it. Like, they'd have to respond, you know. That just doesn't exist. That doesn't exist on the state level. It doesn't exist in most towns, counties. All the way down, this news ecosystem has been completely decimated.
So I guess talk a little bit about that in Red Bank then, like your approach to covering the town and maybe some of the stuff that, you know, readers don't always find as sexy and exciting, but you know is important as a journalist. Like, can you talk a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring it out, right? Because I've been at Red Bank Green for 9 months now, and only, you know, at the helm officially for 2 or 3 months. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is just knowing what the role is. I mean, we talked a lot about fun stories we did. We did an April Fool's story that was big. That was like, we did a video about a fake school in Red Bank that was teaching New Jerseyans how to pump their own gas.
It was hilarious. So I'm going to actually link to that in the Substack. Post that up.
Because if you're not listening to this in New Jersey, it's the only state in the country where it's illegal to pump your own gas. And people really do. There was a kernel of truth in that, which is New Jerseyans who go out of state sometimes find themselves at the pump and being like, oh, crap, what am I going to do? Like, so anyway, we fooled a lot of people, including the statewide radio station, who did 3 straight shows on this supposed on the issue.
They did 3.
Yeah, 3 straight shows like the evening guy, and then the morning, and then the afternoon. They all were talking about, and then
Wow.
told them it was you had to check the calendar when you're reporting on something on April 1st. Where was I even going with all that?
So how you approach kind of some
How
of
do I
the council stuff happening and those issues?
You just have to. It's just nuts and bolts reporting, right? It's
Yeah.
just so. I don't know. I've been doing this for so long. It feels. It's wild going back and covering a municipal government after I hadn't done it since 1998. That was the last time I sat. I mean, I covered a lot of state government, so I sat through hearings. I even sit at the floor at a lot of the borough council meetings because I'm so used to sitting on the floor at the committee meetings in Trenton.
Yeah.
Like there'd be no room they'd be so crowded that the press would be on the floor. And like, I'm at the borough council meeting, there's a million chairs, and some nights I'm on the floor. It just feels like I just got used to that. So you just, look, I'm a resident of this town too. So that's the other thing is I want to know, and I am a policy wonk,
Okay.
I really am like a geeky policy wonk. And like, if there's like waterfront access issues or tax issues or water, I can't walk out my front door without looking at things and thinking about, what policy made this sidewalk and what policy was this road paved under and how is this done? How did this get done? And a lot of it's just basic. It's basic municipal reporting. It's just, going to the meetings and asking questions afterwards is the most important part of the thing. I mean, a lot of it is not just covering meetings, but you got to do the groundwork afterwards and looking into things in the budget, and it's sort of 101. It's like it gets ingrained in your bones after.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see
that.
that.
It feels so familiar, even though I haven't done it in so long.
Well, and I appreciate that you'll go to a council meeting or a committee meeting and you'll observe what's happening there. But you take your time outside of it. Like you'll call people to check quotes, and you'll actually dig in further into, the documents going behind it. So,
and context, I've always thought my job, and one thing that drives me crazy, and that drove me really crazy about being part of TV news, was I felt like I used to joke. I was like, let's take the story and suck all the context out of it. Right? So let's talk about pedestrian deaths and accidents, right? This is a big issue in Red Bank.
oh yes, I've
Huge issue
vocal
in Red
on
Bank.
it.
But you can't talk about that issue without looking at the nationwide skyrocketing numbers, nationwide,
Yes.
of pedestrian deaths. And people on their phones, distracted driving,
Yep.
auto companies making larger automobiles. The New York Times did an incredible deep dive that showed that the pedestrian deaths are not skyrocketing in a lot of other countries because they have stick shifts in 90% of the cars, and people can't be on their phones. So you do a story about a pedestrian death in Red Bank, and people are up in arms saying, this town, they're not doing anything about it. And yeah, Red Bank has a lot of issues in its infrastructure and could be a lot more bicycle, and this has been something for 20 years. How we don't have protected bike lanes in this town. I've been living in this town for 21 years. I'm still afraid to ride my bike to work.
Oh,
and I would ride it to work in this building more often if there was a protected bike lane. Like that kind of infrastructure will increase right, ridership. So anyway,
100%. No, that's a whole different.
it's a whole different issue.
episode.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, even though Red Bank is lacking in that infrastructure and that movement has you can't look at pedestrian deaths and not look at the nationwide. COVID, there was no traffic. Cops stopped enforcing traffic laws. People are driving like crazy, and there's a nationwide epidemic of pedestrian deaths, distracted driving, and same thing with property taxes. People complain about Red Bank's property taxes. We had a big water rate increase recently. One of my biggest challenges with the water rate story was it was very hard to discern whether what Red Bank was paying before and after the increases is different from all these other towns. And I spent like a half a day in the Bureau of Public Utilities websites trying to go through their minutes to find out what American Water's charging in Bergen County and if there's all these everyone has different rates. It's really and I have to cover everything. So you spend a half a day on that, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not sure how much context I can actually provide, but.
And then you didn't get to go to the ice cream shop opening or whatever.
Right. But I find that context is really important in helping people understand what's going on around them. And I always try to, even if I can't completely get to the bottom of it, just try to say most pedestrian stories are going to say, well, this is part of a nationwide. Red Bank is struggling with a nationwide problem here.
Yeah. And that perspective is something that I appreciate because, you're not just going to, report on something I could read in council minutes or anything like that. You actually figure out what the council's voting on or what issue or what position was taken, and you do that investigative work like a real journalist. I mean, that's I think what I'm excited about with you joining Red Bank Green is knowing the quality of your work and having met you several times and seen you at the council meetings and then read the stories that you publish about issues, which is so valuable to the town. But having said that, let's talk about your favorite stories. What are some of the favorite stories you've done, be they funny or more serious? I know what some of mine are.
For Red Bank Green or
For Red Bank Green.
ever?
What are some of the favorite things?
I haven't been here that long, so.
Or you've seen in the paper, what are some of your favorite moments so far?
I mean, we just won an award. This is so there's that. I mean, I'm really big on. I did a story recently about how long it's taken for the park to come at sunset. So when I moved into Red Bank in 2003, the headline on what was then the Hub was the local newspaper.
Yes.
We moved into the West Side, and the headline was "Park Coming to the West Side." 2003. 21 years that has been promised to the West Side,
Mm-hmm.
That was those are the kind of things. My favorite story. I mean, I did a search for the most fun story I've done. I did a search for Red Bank's best bench.
That was a good one.
It sounds so completely mundane, but this is what the thing was like. So it was a summer day. There was a slow news day, and I decided let's go find Red Bank's best bench. And then I just sat on a bunch of benches. There's a lot of footage of me sitting on benches, and then it turns into I run into this guy who had spread his mother's ashes on one of these benches, and he goes sort of talking very emotionally about his mom. And then I met another guy who just went into this very eloquent, talking about the town and the history and how he comes and sits on the waterfront, and people need to appreciate this town. And at the end, it turned into this sort of commentary on life and death and appreciating where you are and the moment. And I love that about stuff. I mean, I love that when you go out, you have this idea. And I kind of knew that using the bench was going to be a device to tell a larger story. And then you just trust yourself that when you're out there, you're going to find people who are going to fill in all the blanks. But sitting on a bench really is sort of just sitting there and appreciating life, and then this guy he just gave me everything. I didn't have to do anything. He was so great at the end of it, and it just summed up a lot of what I love about this town too. Is that you run into so many different types of people, and
yeah, I actually don't know the last time I sat on a bench. I really I mean, I'm always going here, going there, and that's kind of really interesting to think about. But it kind of brings me to the point about these stories you bring in the community and the people you meet through your reporting, and now you're doing reporting in the town that you live in. And one of the things I've talked about on this podcast is kind of this loneliness crisis. And I've interviewed other people that focus on building communities and finding community. And I think that's another really important aspect to your work is that you really do connect our community. You guys report on events happening in town, so you bring people out to events, you interview residents, and you do some cool videos. So I think that's a really exciting aspect too, is connecting a community.
When I moved into video from covering public policy issues, crime and immigration and things like that, is when I really sort of realized the power of just telling one person's story. And letting people get to know their neighbors. I mean, I did feel at a certain point, especially with the politics being so divided in the country, I had this TV segment, or it was me shooting it, and it was me editing. I did everything, and so I was limited in what I could do, sort of. And then I was like, really became sort of out of necessity, just telling individual people's stories. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, like, months and months into that, I was like, well, maybe this is the one thing that I can do in this toxic, divisive environment where people don't know their neighbors and people are afraid of people who don't look like them, is to just maybe make that person sitting on their couch in Brick, New Jersey, spend 3 minutes trying to live in somebody else's shoes, you know, and just use video to do that. I mean, again, this story about Edith Blake, 106 years old, grew up in Fairhaven where the schools were segregated, told the story of watching the segregated black school burned down from her window, watched her school burn down, 100 years ago. And she has lived for 21 years, 4 houses from me. And
wow.
I think I really never met her until I went out to do the story. I was like so awful on my part, first of all, like, this is terrible.
Well,
but it was great to have that opportunity. I mean, I'm really happy to be here and be able to know. One of the things about being a journalist too is I could never get involved in my town on any civic level. Yeah. My hours were so crazy. I could never coach Little League. Mm-hmm. I could never do anything. I couldn't volunteer on anything. I could never commit to anything because it was so. Yeah. So it feels really good to be able to provide, just be a part of the community on a level that I, as a journalist, Yeah. Doing what I can do, what I know the best, and helping people meet their neighbors.
Yeah. Well, I think that that has such tremendous value in the society that we're living in, because you mentioned the divisiveness of, national politics and national issues. And I think one of the stories that affected me the most after 2016 and Donald Trump being elected was this story I heard about, like, a block in some town where it was, like, very divided. Like, one side was Hillary, one side was Trump. People were fighting with each other, and everyone was so mad. But, like, that block needed a stop sign. Like, there had been a series of accidents at the end of their street, and they all came together and, like, fought the town to get this stop sign. And then they realized, okay, like, we can actually talk to each other and work together and work through things. If we can actually just kind of, like, level with each other in that way. And I think that's also, like, the power of focusing on local issues and focusing on things in your town, because you don't need to really be, living in that world of, like, the national dialogue, because these are things that are in your community. And so many issues in your town aren't about, like, the Republican or the Democratic platform. It's just about, like, neighbors figuring out, like, what's best for the town and working through them. So another kudos to Red Bank Green for kind of bringing everybody that information so we can be involved in the town.
Yeah, the November election doesn't mean anything to anybody if there's a car barreling down your street and, hits a kid on a tricycle.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, those are the kind of things. And what you realize through that is it's just the shared humanity that we're all kind of forgetting, which is,
exactly,
we all want to protect our kids. We all cry at funerals. We all, and those are the kind of stories you just have to. I feel it's weird because early in my career I did this huge, impactful work. I covered the racial profiling by the New Jersey State Police. That was my first beat at the Star-Ledger. The whole turmoil in the state police back in the 90s.
Okay.
And you do this sort of what you think is going to be high impact journalism. And then recently, 20 years later, there was a report that came out last week about the state police.
Exactly.
And I could not believe it. It was all this reporting, all these issues that I had reported on 21 years ago. And I tell young journalists, too, that if you think you are going to go into this and change the world, you are setting yourself up for burnout.
Yeah.
Because it stops the times in your career where you're going to make big, impactful, widespread change. But those moments where you can tell somebody's individual story and make their day, or just make them feel valued by having that story told, or get the 10 people in their neighborhood to know them, like that smaller sort of, the butterfly fluttering effect.
Yeah.
And then you look back at a 30-year career and you think about how many hundreds and maybe thousands of those stories that I've told that had those little effects. That eclipses anything that I thought I could do earlier in my career when I was like gonna come in and change the world and fix the New Jersey State Police, which clearly hasn't happened 21 years later with a new AG's report out last week.
Well, I have a bumper sticker on my car that says democracy is a team sport, right? So journalism plays one role, bringing attention to issues, informing people. And then you need people to vote. You need politicians to listen to their constituents and pass legislation. I mean, there's so many things that go into, broad and impactful change.
The journalism part of that stool is just so wobbly right now. That leg of that stool is so. I mean, I think that's a huge problem where we are. I mean, I think the cable news ecosystem, tore us apart as people saw profits just catering to the right and the left, and then social media came in on top of it.
Yeah.
And communities, if they don't have something like Red Bank Green, can be torn apart on a local level if they don't have somebody, telling it straight.
Well, I guess that kind of brings me to my last question for you. I like to end every episode with a quick call to action or a takeaway. So for people listening that, this issue resonates with them, they want to do something, what would you advocate like a listener does? I mean, if they have a great local outlet, find it, subscribe, right? But what if they don't? Are there organizations or steps they can take to try to find, support local journalism?
Well, another thing they can do besides just hitting the subscribe button, and this just drives me crazy. Like, you see a lot of people who online run into paywalls, and they're like, oh, they complain about a paywall. Yeah. And I'm like, well, did you go to a restaurant and complain that they charge you for the food? It drives me crazy, right? Yeah. We all conditioned a couple generations of readers now that content and news is for free, and we're paying the price for that. So yeah, I mean, you said besides subscribe, but subscribe is the biggest one. There's a lot of nonprofits emerging around the country who are trying to help local news sites.
Yeah.
And they need support on every level. The other thing is too that if you have an ad-supported local news site like Red Bank Green, there's a couple different models. There's the nonprofit model that's emerging, and then there's the ad-supported model. I mean, use the advertisers and go to the advertisers and say, hey, I'm here because I saw your ad in the Gazette.
Yep.
They need to know that those ads are effective.
Yeah.
Rather than, Google and Facebook have sucked up all the advertising revenue out of this industry, and that's what's happened.
Right.
So if people are directly advertising with those publications, they need to know that works, and it does work. And the other thing is,
who are some of the nonprofits that that are working on this issue, that are expanding local news coverage and things like that?
I'm going to draw a blank on that.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
we can come back to it all when I put out the Substack with this episode. I'll include. I know one of my favorite outlets is the New Jersey Monitor, and I think they're part of a collective national nonprofit organization focused on state newsrooms.
Right. So those guys are trying to fill that void that I talked about with the 13-person bureau going down to one, and they're doing a great job. This is where it becomes hard. You talked about this mix of content. New Jersey Monitor, I love, but it's hard to draw people in. It's very wonky.
It is.
And that's their mandate, is to cover public policy and to cover politics. But I think a challenge for a place like that is the old newspapers knew they had to throw out a wide net and appeal people to a wide, right? You have to sort of trick people into reading the hard news. You got to give them something else, to draw them in,
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, so they're doing. I mean, the reporting is great.
Well, and that's kind of what this whole project is about. Is I have so many friends who will text me as it gets to close to election day, so who's good on this issue, or who's running, who should I vote for? I know other people who just don't follow the news day to day on politics because they're just turned off, and I get it. I get turned off by it, right? But if I like call someone I know that lives in like a neighboring town, like, hey, your school board's about to like do something crazy, or they're like doing book bans and this and that, they'll get more involved. So it's kind of this, middle of the road person that's like a busy parent. They're not going to like sit in a council meeting. They're not going to like take a day off to go to Trenton and lobby on an issue, but they still want to be informed. They still want to know what's happening. And I think, through, better journalism, through, more digestible but like informative information, people can actually become a little bit more informed and become engaged again. Like, we need to make it tangible. Like, it shouldn't just be left for people who want to run for office and people who are working in a think tank. Like, the everyday person needs to know about this stuff so that they can vote accordingly, right? So, I don't know.
We're trying.
Oh, yeah, we are. We are. But, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy. I know you've got a vacation to get off to, which is
a mini vacation. Yeah.
Hey, it's still...
A little surfing, a little fishing.
Yeah, Block Island's an amazing place.
Yes.
You enjoy that. And thank you for everything you do.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
Anyone listening, see if you have a local paper. Make sure it's a reputable source at first. Make sure it's real news and not like a Russian bot or something.
Careful. Watch out for those bots.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Here in Red Bank, too. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Brian. And, we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.